Bienvenido de nuevo. Welcome back to the Jardín Botánico, the Botanical Gardens here in Medellín, Colombia. My name is Andrew White. I am the Vice President of the Colombian Association of Science Journalists and Communicators. And again, today we're having a live stream here on the YouTube channel to talk with some of the speakers from the 12th World Conference of Science Journalists. So today I'm going to get my speakers to introduce themselves, give you a bit of a taste of the sessions that they have just given, and hopefully we'll be back this afternoon to talk about those sessions as well. So let's start with Patricia. Patricia, if you could introduce yourself and let us know a bit about what your session was about and what the reaction was from the audience here.
My name is Patricia Luna. I am a science journalist and I also work for international media outlets. And my session was on early warning systems and what the world can learn from Latin America early warning systems. And this is in a context of an increasing number of disasters that are happening in the last years. According to some reports, in the last 50 years, there's been an increase of fivefold in the number of disasters, and that's something that is going to continue as climate change continues to impact, especially in a continent like Latin America, which is very exposed naturally to some kind of hazards. There was a discussion about why disasters are not natural, which is something that we usually say, disasters, natural disasters, and that's deeply wrong, because we give the impression to people that disasters are something that are unavoidable, that come from the heaven, if you're a believer, as there are some kind of punishment. But science and lots of people that are working in different organizations have proved that we can do things to prevent some disasters to become worse or to reduce the mortality of the disasters. And that's where the early warning systems come, because they can reduce up to 8 times the possibility of dying because of disaster, and also reduce at 30% of the cost of economical impact, which is huge in countries that suffer disasters and that are normally developing countries that have an impact on their economies and entering a cycle of poverty, of recovering from disaster and coming into a different disaster.
Particularly here in Colombia, where there have been some very famous examples. One of the things that I was curious about, you had some of these examples from Latin America of things that can be done. You mentioned before that it's not just waiting for them to happen. So what are some of those local initiatives that have sort of been backed by science?
I think the world can learn a lot from this area, this continent, because it's seismic from very prone to earthquakes. So we have 2 countries, Mexico in North America and Chile in South America, that suffer very often earthquakes. I mean, if you look at the tables in the seismology centers, you have several earthquakes or seismic movements every single day. In Chile, for example, 10, 20 every day. We talk about the early warning system that was developed by Mexican civil society, civil engineers. It's meant to be one of the first in the world, and it gives people up to 1 minute prevention to move to a different part, and how Mexico has improved their mortality rates after some of the big earthquakes that have shaped their history, and also what can be done in terms of improving the communication with communities and what the media can improve in their reporting, so we have a better understanding of the complexity and the vulnerabilities that surround all the disasters.
Fantastic, thank you so much. I think we'll move on to Laura now. Okay, so Laura, if you could introduce yourself, introduce your session, and let us know a bit about what was talked about. And maybe commence with, this was a very special dynamic because we had people joining us from all over the world via Zoom, so that people here at the Botanic Gardens could see them, but you were the only person here.
Yes, I was the anchor.
Yeah.
I was the moderator. So our session was about inequity in science and in
We
science
could just
journalism.
quickly start with your name and where you're from.
Oh, I forgot that part. Yes, thank you. My name is Laura Helmuth. I'm the editor-in-chief at Scientific American. And yeah, so I was the anchor for this session, and the other 4 panelists were remote, so they zoomed in, and it went really well. We had a room that was full of people who were engaged and stayed to the end and had lots of questions, asked each other questions. And who was on the panel? We had 2 journalists from India, one from Africa, I believe he's in Nigeria right now, and a scientist from Brazil. And so they each spoke about different types of inequity in their cultures. So we talked about caste discrimination in India, discrimination against LGBTQ plus people in India and Africa, and basically around the world. In Brazil, our speaker was a scientist who's done a lot of work trying to make science more welcoming to girls and women. So it was a really interesting mix of perspectives. And so each person had specific examples of where there's inequity, where there's discrimination, where there's bias that they have experience with. And but some of the principles were also kind of global, and that is, whenever there's a situation where there's a group that's not welcome into science or not welcome into journalism, it can be very alienating and unwelcoming. And one of the speakers mentioned the idea that if I don't see anybody like me, am I supposed to be here? How can I be doing this if I'm the only one? And what counts as like me, depends on the situation. Are you the only woman, only person of color, only person who's LGBTQ plus? And if we have situations like that where some people aren't considered, part of who does science, that really makes the science less effective, makes it more exclusive, and just less useful. And as journalists, since most of the people in the audience are journalists or communicators in some way, some of the things we can do are to encourage the people to think about who are we covering, like whose research are we covering. Are they actually working with underrepresented groups? Do they do mentorship? Can we kind of help set an expectation that the people who are worth covering in journalism, who have important stories that we want to help tell, we want to make sure that those people are also doing good and promoting social justice and not just reinforcing existing power imbalances.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a lot.
One of the interesting things about being here at the Botanical Gardens is that we're surrounded by biodiversity. It's one of the most biodiverse countries on Earth. And the thing that we seem to get from ecology is that the more diversity you have, the more different perspectives that you have, the stronger the ecosystem, and that it's not something that's nice to have. It is something that's essential to keep. We know from very purebred dogs that if you don't have any diversity, that's not great. So I think that it's really interesting to see that those perspectives are coming through. And maybe you can just sort of finish up by talking about, like, why is it important for us to have not only in our newsrooms and in where we're doing science journalism, but also in our sources. For example, there's a great website called Gauge, G-A-G-E, where the 500 women scientists, where you can find a female scientist. Like, there is no excuse anymore. There is literally a search engine. So why is it important to have the diversity of sources and diverse viewpoints within a newsroom, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes the journalism better. Absolutely. Like you say, diversity of perspectives, diversity of insights, experience, background, all of that can make any story richer and more true. One of the examples from our conference is that one of our speakers was talking about the problem of visa discrimination, which is that if you have a conference on public health and people from the entire continent of Africa are not able to go because the host country has discriminatory visa practices, that means that if you go there as a journalist to cover it, you're not getting the right perspective. You're not getting the stories you could have gotten. You're getting much more superficial understanding of global health in that case.
Because there's no scientists from 3 different continents.
Yeah. So if your job as a journalist is to help people understand the world, is to yourself understand the world, you're missing huge chunks of it. If you're not aware of all the inequities and all the structural reasons why science is so limited in many ways.
Okay, fantastic. And we'll finish off with Joanna. I'm going to do this, because we are here in Colombia, I'm going to do this last interview in Spanish, but I will also be translating into English. Entonces comenzamos con su nombre, de dónde eres y por qué, y cuál fue la dinámica de la sesión de hoy. Entonces hacemos corto en que puedo traducir y seguimos así.
Perfecto, gracias, Andrew. Yo soy Joana Osorio, soy periodista de investigación en un medio venezolano que se llama Armando.info, que investiga pues, específicamente corrupción y temas relacionados con la influencia del Estado venezolano en las distintas áreas de nuestra sociedad, ¿no?
Okay, so Joanna is from Venezuela and she covers the government and how things are developing there in Venezuela.
Bueno, sobre la dinámica de la charla que tuvimos hoy, precisamente hablamos sobre la importancia del periodismo transfronterizo para el alcance de nuestras investigaciones en diversas áreas, específicamente en este caso en el área científica.
Okay, so these are stories that cross borders. So the panel today was discussing how to cover stories that cross across borders.
Exactamente. Pues uno de los puntos más importantes de esta charla fue la importancia no solo de tener distintas miradas sobre un tema, sino que pues estas distintas miradas y estos distintos integrantes de equipos en distintos países nos ofrecen una perspectiva distinta.
So everyone had a different perspective. So if you have journalists working from different countries, all working on the same project, they're all going to be contributing their different viewpoints to that story.
Y no solo la importancia de estar en distintos países, sino de tener equipos multidisciplinarios que nos ofrecen.
So it's not just viewpoints, but also from different disciplines as well.
Exactamente. Hablamos sobre cómo este puede ser el futuro del periodismo en este momento, porque rompemos con la estructura pues, de este periodista solitario y nos armamos de un equipo de trabajo que nos permite entonces tener mayor alcance geográfico también, pero tener un análisis mucho más rico también de los temas con los que tratamos.
So perhaps the future of journalism isn't this very solitary way that it's been done for so long, that we can team up and become stronger by being a bigger team and having different abilities and different perspectives within a grander team, and maybe not in the newsroom sense that maybe people are used to, but freelancers or other people coming together to do projects together.
Sí. Y no solo la importancia de tener enfoques en países distintos y distintas disciplinas, sino también de tener una mirada interseccional de los temas que tratamos. O sea, de no solo quedarnos con un grupo de la población, sino tocar temas de la población LGBTIQ+, tomar en cuenta cómo estos problemas afectan especialmente al género femenino, a las personas racializadas.
Okay, voy a intentar traducir eso. I'm going to try and translate that in not just the diversity of viewpoints, but looking at things from a specific viewpoint. So, for example, from a female journalist covering a story from a female perspective rather than, the one perspective that it's usually told from. ¿Algo así? Okay, fantastic. So I hope that you all got something out of that. I'm going to let our speakers get to lunch, and it's a beautiful day out here in the Jardín Botánico in Medellín, Colombia. So we're going out into the sunshine. We hope to do another transmission very soon to let you know about the afternoon sessions. And in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to my guests for giving up their time, and I hope this has been really useful for all of you. I'm Andrew White.